Hello, everybody. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the C Show. Got your boy Chris here, and with me tonight I got Larry the lawyer, and we're going to debate a very interesting topic that historians have now maybe looked back on and having second thoughts about whether it was that successful. And that is going to be the New Deal. Larry, how are you, my man?
I'm doing fine, Chris, and you?
I'm good, buddy. Thanks for coming on. So, Larry, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said my pleasure.
Oh, so Larry, the New Deal.
Yeah.
Success, failure, somewhere in between. What's your take?
I'm going with a shade of gray on this one. I think it's somewhere in between. I think that some things worked, some things didn't work. It did give a lot of people hope, but the United States did not officially come out of the Depression until the start of World War II.
That is very true. So, the New Deal did not bring us out of the Depression.
Not in and of itself, no. But also the Republican program before Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president and started the New Deal legislation also didn't bring us out of the Depression.
No, it didn't. And I'm not sure what exactly economic philosophy that Hoover subscribed to. I mean, a lot of them believe just let it work it out itself. Of a laissez-faire type economics.
That would be what you think Hoover would have done, or maybe even what Hoover should have done, but he didn't. Hoover was very
okay. What did Hoover do?
Hoover was very concerned about the stock market crash,
right.
Which he probably shouldn't have been that concerned about it. But the major thing that Hoover did was pass the Hawley-Smoot tariff, and basically that isolated the United States economically.
Yes, that's true. It did.
Because it isolated the United States economically, it forced the United States to become more and more self-sufficient, and it limited imports, and also ultimately it limited exports when the when the European countries and Japan put in protective tariffs of their own.
I would think at that time right there, and I'm more of one who subscribes to a laissez-faire type economics. I mean, and then you have the idea of, and there's so many numerous the Keynesian economics, which I guess would have been Roosevelt.
Right, Keynesian would be to spend our way out of the Depression. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, is that the government's place to spend your way out of recession?
Well, is it the government? It's a legitimate government policy. It may not be the best economic policy, but the government has the right to spend money for the common defense and the general welfare. And the general welfare can very well mean infrastructure. The government.
Yeah, there was infrastructure that was done. I mean, and then what you have? And there was some, like I said, there was some stuff that was very successful. Again, we've talked about this time. The TVA. I mean,
absolutely,
it was great. But
the dams, the Bonneville Dam in Washington, the Hoover Dam in Nevada, Arizona. Some of the programs worked. Some of the programs were declared unconstitutional before they even had a chance to work or not work. issue
What
was
was it the CCC that was supposedly a big failure?
well, the CCC ultimately became the bulwark of the military. The Civilian Conservation Corps, but once the war started, and once we became on war footing, the CCC was very instrumental in gathering these men together so they could serve in our military.
Well, wait. There's something I'm thinking. There was something like that, and I can't think it was like a. See, there was another one like that that was supposed to have been a big.
The Agricultural Adjustment Act?
No, it was something that was putting people to work, but it really didn't help. I can't remember what it was.
I mean, the NIRA was declared unconstitutional too soon to do anything.
If you look too, I mean, from where the unemployment rates that was in 1932 and where they were in 1936, I mean, there was not a tremendous amount of economic upturn in the United States. And then when I forgot what year was it that some of his programs was ruled unconstitutional, unemployment rates started to actually drop a good bit, and as soon as these policies got enacted, unemployment shot right back up.
Yeah, well, that was the whole thing. That was in 36 or 37,
Right.
because Roosevelt came in and he started his programs to affect the population and affect the workforce. The issues were whether he had the power to do that. And at the very beginning, the Supreme Court was ruling against a lot of the initial New Deal programs as being unconstitutional for some reason or another. Some of them it did not rule against, but some it did. It gutted the NIRA. It gutted the NRA. It declared the AAA unconstitutional, and it didn't allow them, Roosevelt, to run a lot of the agencies. But then again, there were other issues of constitutionality. Hoover had basically the same thing at the very end, but none of his programs actually got tested before he left office.
I mean, you're talking about, does the president have the power to do that? Is that what you're talking about with constitutionality?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Does either the president or the legislature have the power to do it? Don't forget, when the president, when an agency is created, and then the legislative creates the agency, the president signs it into law, and then the legislature gives legislative power to the president to appoint a director and to run the agency.
Right.
Amongst the early Supreme Court decisions, they were declaring this unconstitutional because the legislature did not have the authority to give power to the executive. There was also issues of whether something was within interstate commerce or not within interstate commerce. It was called direct commerce and indirect commerce. The federal government could rule on direct commerce matters, but not on indirect commerce matters. And basically, the definition was how commerce was affected by the resolution or by the law. It was
Larry,
also,
I remember what I was thinking of. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It was the Civil Works Administration that was such an abysmal failure. I mean, they put these people to work for just a few months. Sorry. didn't want to lose that thought. That's what I was trying to remember. But I'm
Okay.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead with
So basically, what you're saying is that the when the government put in jobs programs for artists and writers and that type of thing, that's what you're talking about with the Civil Works program, correct?
yeah.
You're probably right, but the issue is, what could these people do? I mean, you're talking about some of the greatest artists and writers in the United States were helped along by that program.
You talking about, when I
I'm
said
thinking-
the Civil Works they built like schools, pipes. There was manual labor jobs. I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you asked.
Oh, okay. No, you're thinking of you're thinking of probably the WPA, the Works Progress Agency.
I think that was up under the second New Deal, actually.
It was. It was after the NRA
Yeah.
was declared
The
unconstitutional.
Public Works projects, I believe, was in the first. Let's see, the CCC and the CWA was the that's, I mean, they put them. It was just for the winter of that year, and it was manual labor jobs. And then after it was over with, they were back out of work again.
Yeah, they were make work jobs. You want your economy to move forward. The issue is, how do you get your economy to move forward? And one of the major problems was that both the Hoover administration and the Roosevelt administration did was they tried to tighten money. They tried to take money out of circulation.
Whose idea was that? I mean, that seems like a horrible idea.
Well, it started out being Hoover's idea, and Roosevelt took it a number of steps further. It was a terrible idea, because it's almost the opposite of Reagan's trickle-down economics, which also might have been a pretty bad idea, the way it was set up. But the issue was, you don't want to take money out of the economy. You want people to be able to be paid, and you want people to be able to invest. And the taking money out of the economy really destroyed agriculture more than the Holly Smoot tariff. When you look at United States agriculture in that time period, many farms were self-sufficient in good years only. So basically, what you had, these people every year would borrow money for seed and for machinery and for work. Pardon?
I said right.
Right. And that based on the crop they got, hopefully they would be able to pay everybody back. And hopefully they would not have to borrow the next year if it was a good crop. And hopefully they could actually save a little money in case there was a problem. But when you take money out of the economy, it's more difficult to get these loans in the first place. And if you can't buy seed, you can't plant anything. If you can't buy machinery, your harvest may not be as good as it was, and you have three problems. You either make do with what you can, you leave, or you starve, and that's why agriculture was such a disaster in that time. And of course, you also had the failure of crop rotations and the Dust Bowl.
Let's go into the IRA for a minute. Why was that? I mean, there was a lot of stuff that was put into that. So many things. I guess some of it was good, and some of it. I mean, does the government really have that much authority?
Well, that's the whole thing. What authority does the government have? That's the question. There was when one of the major issues, and it was a difference between rulings on state and federal, is the Constitution does not allow the government to change the basis of contracts. So if you and I make a contract with each other, technically the Constitution says the government cannot impose terms of their own onto our contract, either change it or do anything else with it. Now, basically, the Supreme Court held at the very beginning of the New Deal legislation that the states could have the right to change contracts if they were fair and reasonable regulations involved. But the very first claims against the federal government was that the federal government did not have the right to do the same changes. So that was an issue right there. Another issue. Let's take the gold standard cases. There were 3 gold standard cases in either 33 or 34. Now, normally, and one of the major ones was when you had contracts and you put into contracts that payment had to be made in gold or payment had to be made in gold certificates or something like that. And that was reasonable and it was legal at the time. Congress passed a law saying that those terms could not be in a standard contract anymore. And normally, the Supreme Court was made up of 4 very conservative justices, 3 very liberal justices or moderate justices, and 2 swing justices. You would assume that Charles Evans Hughes, who was the Chief Justice, would go with the 4 and knock that out on the basis of contract. However, Hughes and Roberts, the 2 swing justices, went along with Brandeis, Cardozo, and Stone, and they upheld those laws. And the reason they upheld the laws was even though there was issues with the contract clause of the Constitution, the monetary control of the United States currency and monetary system is under the purview of the House of Representatives and the legislative branch. And the court said that these were a legal remedy that could be imposed by the House of Representatives and the legislative branch. So
I mean, there were some good things out there. I mean, the Fair Labor Act. I mean, fair wages.
Yeah,
came out of that.
Yeah.
I mean, does the government have the right to do that? I mean, I would hope so. If it's to promote the
at the very beginning of the New Deal, the government did not have the right to do that. And
you don't think that falls up under promote the general welfare?
Cases like that, and we have some cases there. And the reason why the government did not have the right to do that is it was stated that wages were not direct commerce. They were indirect commerce, or they were contract. So there was issues. Once the court decided that this was directly affecting commerce, then the Commerce Clause was used to set wages, put in the Social Security system, and various other systems. See, the whole thing is, in order for a law to be constitutional, it cannot be against a clause directly against the clause in the Constitution unless it's unless there are other clauses to be set off against it. Banking clauses sometimes have been upheld in the states because of equal protection, but they would not be upheld in the federal government because the Commerce Clause or the Monetary Clause or the Contracts Clause would be more effective for federal government. So you were dealing with a very divisive court at the very beginning of Roosevelt's term. Ultimately, two of the conservative judges resigned, another one died, and Justice Brandeis resigned. So Roosevelt was able to pick four liberal to moderate judges, Douglas, Black, and later on Frankfurter, but Minton, who were all working with the president as advisors. The three of them, well, not Black, and Black was the senator from Black was from either Mississippi or Alabama, I think.
Yeah.
But he was one of these. He was a Southern senator.
Yeah.
Very liberal senator.
Yeah.
Douglas was from either Washington or living in Washington at the time. I believe he was actually from Minnesota. And Frankfurter was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but was living in either Massachusetts or New York at the time. So these men and Tom Clark and other justices, when these men came on the court, then these men were much more liberal in their interpretation of New Deal legislation.
Right.
So, after, say, 1936, 1937, basically anything that the government passed would be acceptable. But the problem is, the major problem as I see it, and I actually did a little more research today, the major problem as I see it was that the government was at odds with the private economic system in the country. The government was taking over a lot of the private economic functions, especially in the power agencies. And once the private companies were affected by taxation or by being unable to go into certain areas of the law, i.e., power, which became a government monopoly more or less, the private sector could not invest and create jobs.
No, and that's what happened when you seen all these run out.
Correct. I mean, that was these were the whole issues. The government, and I can argue both sides of the issue, but it's my belief that the government usurped more power than it should have. I don't believe it usurped more power than it could have. I believe that mostly everything the government did was constitutionally legitimate, but I believe that the government should have worked with the private sector to a much greater degree. And I'm talking about Hoover's government as well as Roosevelt's government, because Hoover's government specifically started to put regulations on the private sector also. You can't do this, you can't tax this, you can't put this much money into research and development, that type of stuff. And fact, Hoover at one point said, "What did you want me to do? Do nothing when the country is suffering?" The answer is maybe that might have been a better idea. A lot of people, a lot of some economists think so, but those were the issues involved in the New
What
Deal.
happened after they declared this stuff constitutional and that's got put in place? What happened? You had an economic downturn and unemployment went right back up in 1937 and 38.
Correct. Well, that was the whole thing. The government, Roosevelt was trying. One thing you can't fault him was at least his heart was in the right place. He saw that the economy was hurting. He saw that the little people, the forgotten man, so to speak, was hurting. He couldn't put food on the table. He didn't have a job.
I guess hope is what you hear. He gave people hope. He gave people something to believe in.
Exactly.
Whether it's actually, whether their life was actually getting better or not, that's
Well, the issue is if I'm sitting around the house and I can't do anything and the rent comes due, what am I going to do? I'm going to get thrown out of another apartment. And, let me go on a little aside. If you read about the Great Depression, one of the things that landlords had to do, because landlords do not want property vacant, because that property can be looted or destroyed or squatters could take it over. So but in order for them to at least have the property protected, they had to give tenants free rent for a month or two to come in and live in my unit. You won't have to pay rent for the first 3 months. Now, at the very depths of the Depression, after those 3 months were over, those tenants who couldn't afford the rent were back out looking for another deal for 3 or 4 more months free rent. So the landlords suffered, just like landlords are suffering now during COVID under the federal regulations and under state regulations that are not allowing landlords to evict tenants who aren't paying or who can't pay.
I mean, look how much. I mean, after they declare that, we're in a depression, and then we have a recession. While in a depression in 1937, and our unemployment rate up under Roosevelt jumps from 14% almost back up to 20%.
That's correct. But what changes?
Well, that's when they put all of his when the Supreme Court ruled his policies to put them in place.
This in my mind has nothing to do with the Supreme Court.
Do what now?
World War II starts in 1939, basically.
Right. But are you talking about what economic downturn?
Huh?
Are you talking about what caused the economic downturn?
No, I'm talking about what caused the economic upsurge in the United States at this point. The United States was really leery of Nazi Germany starting in 1937, probably 1938 with the appeasement over Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland. What happened was the Germans and the Italians, not caring a lick about their own people, except tangentially, were spending their way out of the economy by militarizing, by building up your army, by building up your arms industry. And then Britain, even with Neville Chamberlain, who has the issues with peace in our lifetime, Neville Chamberlain is at least smart enough to start also increasing his industry and starting more and more to rely on the Commonwealth, not the Commonwealth, his colonial empire. He was getting, because of the Holly Smoot tariff, he had to get, again, cotton from either India or Egypt, because he couldn't get it from the U.S. anymore, which shut off the southern cotton industry. And he couldn't, and tobacco was not coming through because of the tariff either. But these are the whole interests. As soon as Roosevelt decided that he had to militarize, that he had to put people, that he had to get more people in the military, that he had to start exploring armaments, that he got involved with the Lend-Lease in England. That's when the Depression started to end. He had to put people to work in order to provide for the general welfare of the country. And this is where the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, became very important, not because it turned into the military, which basically you could say it actually did, because it trained people. It trained people in jobs and infrastructure, trained people in logistics. These people now who've been out in the wilds working on dams and working on roads, these people were physically fit and could be brought into an army.
Right.
So it was important.
The Japan, England, Germany, we were the last industrialized nation to get out of the Great Depression.
Correct, but we were also the last industrialized nation to get into the Great Depression. We really didn't get into the Depression until basically the early 1930s. I know we talk about the stock market crash in October 1929, but that was just an adjustment. The stock market was crazy for a number of reasons, and the stock market itself was way overpriced. We knew, and many of the economists there knew it had to adjust at some point. They didn't know how bad it was going to adjust, but the issue with the stock market, and this is why some of the SEC, why the SEC was formed and SEC regulations, the stock market ran away with profits. The companies on the stock market were worth much less than the shares that they were selling for. And that's where you needed your correction.
But I mean, I think Germany and England and Japan were all out by like 1936.
Not so much England, but Germany and Japan, yes, because
we were still at in 1940. We were still at my phone, and we were still at really going into 41. We were still at 15% unemployment rate.
That's correct, but what was Japan doing in 1936?
They was in war.
Japan was fighting a war and invading China. That's right. That's what jacked out Japan out of the Depression. Japan was sending troops they were sending troops to Korea which they controlled to wage war on China. They were sending troops to Manchuria to wage war on China, and they were confiscating Chinese infrastructure and Chinese agriculture and Chinese industrials, and that's how the Japanese came out of the Depression so quickly and before anyone else, and that's also the reason why Russia was able to come out of the Depression, also because Russia was attempting to industrialize, attempting to communize by running the Hadomar on the Ukrainian peasantry.
And 5-year plans.
Well, the 5-year plans were there, but they weren't all that successful. The issue where Russia was doing the damage, or where Russia was coming out was she was smart enough to even at this point to start with a major military economic growth. She claimed agricultural and industrial growth, but the industrial growth was basically the military and not consumer industry, which so most of the 5-year plans were lies, but she, as well as Japan and Germany, was spending copiously on their military, and that's what dragged them out. The U.S. as a democracy and as an isolationist democracy wasn't involved in that at this point. Many of the Republicans, but also many of the top Democratic senators, were all isolationists.
True.
They were not.
So true.
They wanted America to stay out. They knew that they said that our oceans would protect us, and they wanted an economy. So that was our issue. We were behind militarizing.
I mean, there were some things that had to come out of there. FDIC, to protect your,
I can't hear you. I have some trucks outside.
Oh, okay.
So, repeat the question,
I
please.
said, all right, some good things coming. The FDIC, to
Federal Discount Insurance Company Corporation.
to protect, your CDs and stuff. How much ever you put in there.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, that okay. That was, I think that was a good idea.
What about the NLRB? National Labor Relations Board.
The National what?
National Labor Relations Board.
I have mixed feelings on that. There's
Well, the NLRB was the legislation that cracked the Supreme Court justices. Because that was the first federal New Deal legislation that passed 5-4 the Supreme Court. So that was it was called the switch in time that saved the 9. And basically, the determination for that was it was direct commerce and not indirect commerce. So therefore, it set up collective bargaining, and it set up unionization, and it set up a lot of other labor laws, and it started wage constructs and everything else. So it was. These were the legislations. Once this legislation passed, Roosevelt knew that he was going to be able to go ahead with much of the rest of his program.
Now, when I was coming up, and I'm sure just coming up too, you heard people, Roosevelt was the greatest president ever, blah, blah, blah. And why did you think it took historians so long to look back and say, hold up, let's take a second look at this. Let's re-examine this.
The issue is it's basically what's happening to history these days. I mean, there were people adamantly opposed to the New Deal during the time it was in effect. Wendell Willkie, who ran against Roosevelt in 1940, was adamantly against the New Deal because, and the reason was he believed that the federal government was overstepping its bounds, and the federal government was trying to destroy the private sector, especially Wendell Willkie was a private power executive. He was into electoral and oil power, oil exploration and electoral power in the private sector.
Well, let's look at this on the New Deal. I mean, people still think the New Deal saved everything, and I think it was in 1931, unemployment had risen to 16.3%. In 1939, it not only dropped, it was still at 17.2%. 9.5 million Americans were now unemployed as opposed to 8.
Correct.
Roosevelt's Secretary of Treasury said that the New Deal was a failure. He had a quote that said, "We are spending more than we ever have spent before, and it does not work." I say after 8 years of this administration, we have just as much unemployment as we did when we started, and an enormous debt to boot.
Correct. And he was absolutely right, but it wasn't a failure. The issue was it wasn't doing what they wanted it to do, but it was still putting people on the job, and it was putting food on the table. And it was putting your 4-letter word that you stated before, hope, in the mind. So if I'm hopeful, if I see something that appears to be getting better, if people are being given make work jobs, then I believe, and I may be totally wrong, but the naive worker me, without an education, without seeing what's going on, if I can feed my family and I can work 25 hours a week, I'm thrilled at this point, because I now am a full person again. I'm not on a dole. I'm a living, breathing member of an industrial complex society. And this is what has to be done. We have to put, it's more important, and I'll go into the historical answer question you asked right after this. It's more important that I think we're going in the right direction than whether we or not we are going in the right direction. And if me and 50 million workers or 35 million workers are starting to see a light at the end of the tunnel, or a little brightness in the fact that I can work and feed my family, then that's the right attitude. Now, when we're looking back at it historically, as we both know, we're looking at facts and figures and yearly unemployment rates and yearly gross national products rates and everything else, but we're not looking at the feelings of that unidentified man, that third man or woman, who are the basis of where we're going from here. I mean, if the people believed that the government was doing nothing, if they gave up and died, then if the government did something or didn't do something, we lost, whether we were in the Depression or not. As long as we could put a positive spin on what we were going on, what was happening to the forgotten man and the forgotten women, then to a person there, we believed that the Depression was was coming to an end. It wasn't like it was in 1929, or it wasn't like it was in 1934, well, when it got a little bit better, but it still was ending.
All right.
So that's the issue. When you're living something, you're looking at it entirely different than when you're looking back at something.
Now, time for discussion on my thing. The
Okay.
thing that I hate the most, that I have said since I was a little kid, that this is not right. It should have been declared unconstitutional a long time ago. Social Security. The government, I've always said, does not have the right to take your money and hold for you till you get to a certain age and give it back to you. It was the greatest Ponzi scheme ever created.
You may absolutely be right, but why doesn't the government have the right to do it?
Because that's my money.
Yes, it's your money.
But where does it say the government? Nowhere does it say that the government has the right to come in and say, "Hey, I'm taking your money and I'm going to hold it for you, and then I'm going to give it back to you later on." I don't think that it was. First of all, there's several things I'd like to point out. I don't think, back then people were 65 years old. People didn't live to be 95 and 100 and stuff like
Correct.
that. I think a lot of it was supposed to help out, some disabled, some old women pensions who, when their husbands died or something. I don't think they ever envisioned it being a retirement for people to have to live off of, when they were 65, 70, 70 years old the rest of their life. But now it's become a crutch. And eventually, we don't have as much people paying in, and it's going to go bankrupt. There's nothing you can do to keep it from going bankrupt.
I mean, you're absolutely right in everything you say, but why is it unconstitutional?
Well, I am not a constitutional lawyer. I would have to, what's the word I'm looking for? Defer to you.
Reserve opinion until you research or something.
Well,
The issue,
I would have to defer to you to answer that question why it's unconstitutional.
okay. Well, the issue is, again, you're absolutely right in everything you say. And the due process clause of the government says that you cannot have your property, your life, or your liberty taken away from you without due process. What is due process? Due process is something in the legal system. If the only way that I could put you in prison is you can be convicted of a crime, and the Constitution allows that. In fact, as a Civil War buff, if you read the 13th Amendment, and I can't quote it to you, but it says that it abolishes the badges and emoluments of slavery unless you're convicted of a crime in due process or something like that. And so meaningly that you can be put in a prison and put in a work gang and everything else if you've been if you've been convicted of a crime. This is the same thing here. The legislation was based on the Commerce Clause. And the reason it was based on the Commerce Clause is because retirement or workers' compensation or Social Security is something that the government has the power to do under the Commerce Clause. I mean, now can the government undo it? You get the right legislature? Yeah, probably.
I thought about this right here because it's going to go bankrupt. I think that by 2034, it's going to be out of money. So somebody's asked me the other day, and I said, I think that people under 30 or 35 should be able to opt out and given whatever money they've paid in and use it If they choose to use it in a 401k or an IRA or some type of retirement, then it's up to them. I mean, there's comes a point that, personal choice and personal freedom. If you should be one who invests this money, not the government holding. I mean, just think about how much taxes that has put on businesses that they have to match the Social Security payroll tax.
Correct.
As well as Medicare tax.
That's perfectly constitutional. Again, whether it's wise or not, it might not be at this point. It probably isn't at this point, but it's perfectly constitutional because you're talking about regulating interstate commerce, and you're talking about regulating general welfare.
I believe they just don't. Surely, I would have think that somebody would have figured out, hey, eventually there's not going to be enough people, or maybe, I guess it's hard to foresee. Maybe they probably never foreseen people living to be 95 and 100 years old like they are today, and life improving. I just.
You're absolutely correct, but the issue is not whether they can or can't do it. The issue is whether they should or shouldn't do it at this point.
Well, I mean, something's going to have to be done with it now. I mean, it's eventually, we can debate, the success rate, but something's going to be done with Social Security sooner or later.
Yes.
And if you notice, nobody's talking about it. Nobody's talking about it. So,
what do you think about a person can only take out what he or she put in?
You mean like when they get ready to draw, or?
Yeah.
Or,
well,
I was thinking about that the other day. I think somebody was telling me. I think he took his. I think he was 2009. He turned 62, so 74. He started drawing like $1,250 a month. I started thinking, well, how much money did you pay in over the years to get $1,250 a month? You start adding that up, and it's like, there's no way you could have paid in that much money in Social Security taxes, over 35 years or whatever, however long you worked.
Well, that's something you may or may not have. I mean, technically, what you start with, your first figure when you go out on such Social Security is based upon what you paid into it.
Yeah, and somebody told me that the way they figure out your Social Security is some about the 10 years in which you earn the most money. They take an average of the top 3 years or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
Because my uncle, he's made pretty good money his whole life. Last 20 years, he's been driving a truck, making around $80,000 a year, and he's working part-time. He quit driving his truck, but he's working part-time. He's working 3 days a week, making $40-something thousand a year, and complaining about that. And I'm like, don't soon start with me. But he's working so he can hold on to his insurance. So when he gets 65, they can get Medicare and buy a supplement. And he said, and like I said, he's not hurting, that he's going to wait till he's 65 till he starts drawing his Social Security, which is only going to be 2 more years from now. And the difference is going to be, $1,900 a month and $2,400 a month. I'm like, he's in good health. I would hold off then too. I mean, if he's making, $45,000 a year right now, holding on to his insurance, then I don't see no reason to start drawing your Social Security.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, actually, it maximizes at 66 now, not 65.
Well, he was born in 58, so I thought he would still be up under that one.
No,
Now, I
no,
think mine's even
I
older
was,
than
I was born in 51 and it maximized at 66.
that. Okay. See, I think mine's even older than that now. I think it's 67 or 68.
I'm not sure.
I
Maybe.
mean, I was born in 76, so um, it will I don't know. Well, I'll worry about jump off that bridge when I get to it.
Yeah, so let's
Let's
so what do you think? Let's go. Let's wrap up on the Depression. Um, Obviously, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, we were already into a basic wartime economy, or at least heading in that direction. Chris?
yeah, I said true.
So I mean, we actually got out of the worst of the Depression before we got involved in World War II to any great extent. Now, we were as bad as we were, and as bad as our gross national product was, we were still in better shape than a lot of other countries that had already pulled out of the Depression years before.
Okay.
I mean, the Japanese were a major industrial force, but the Japanese gross domestic product was still nowhere near our gross domestic product. We had we had more natural resources. We had more industry. Even when we had the worst of our unemployment, we still had a functioning industrial economy. There were not 12 million people out on the streets begging. I mean, yes, there were people begging. Yes, there were people needing to be fed, but we still had something. And the fact that we were creating these jobs and paying money to these people, and also in some things like the TVA and the CCC, we were even providing meals and lodging for these people on work sites and stuff. So that's where we had hope, and that's where our people at least knew that we were going in the right direction. And I don't know, my wife's grandparents had set up and funded kosher soup kitchens in Brooklyn for Orthodox Jews who were down on their luck at this period. And, aside from everything else, people actually helped each other. And one of the things the Republicans were very keen on was charity, charitable giving to the religious institutions, and the religious institutions at the time would then give charity to their members. And, it happened. But at that point, when Roosevelt came in, it was more important that the government direct the relief of the populace than having other organizations do it. And the reason is, probably aside from giving the people hope, it actually gave the government a little bit of control to determine what was more necessary or less necessary. And that's why certain programs that that you believe were more important than other programs, i.e. the TVA or the CCC or the AAA, as opposed to the paying money for art or literature or that type of stuff. But the government, at least the Roosevelt administration, believed that the legislature and the executive should control what's best for the people and best for the needs of the country. And I think that's what gave everybody the hope. It was more like the government was doing something, again, whether wrongly or not, but the people could actually see a meal on the table or a buck in their pocket.
That's a good way to look at it. I mean, you know, I don't think it was a success, by no means, but I can't call it a complete and total failure either. I'm
No.
glad history took this look back at him, though.
Right. I mean, it's very important that we become, when we're looking back at something, we're being critical. We're criticizing what happened, but neither of us lived through that depression. Your grandparents or your great grandparents did. My grandparents
did. My grandfather was born in 1930, and my grandma was born in 34, so they were young.
Yeah, I mean, my grandfather was born in 1895. My father was born in 1922. So, I mean, they lived through the Depression. And they have a different perspective on what they did, on what they had to do. My grandfather was a haberdasher, and men's clothing, you know, people needed clothing during the Depression, so they were able to survive. My father was a plumber. My father ultimately became a CB during the war, but he learned a trade, and a trade that allowed him to survive. When you look at the people jumping out of windows and that type of thing and committing suicide, they weren't your blue collar workers. They were people who were making their money in service industries, who couldn't understand why the service industries were hit so badly. And the reason was, you know, you needed a trade. You needed to be able to do something that was worthwhile to again, put money on the table. And that was the thing. I mean, the whole scenario, again, we're talking about from, let's say 1930 or 1931 to 1939 or 1940. So we're talking 10, 11 years of hell for the people. But we're talking about a government that at least the people were looking to, and the government was either wrongly or rightly trying to help the people get out over it, get out from under it. And that's the issue of people living through this and people looking back at it. The same thing as any type of historical issue. I mean, if you're fighting at the Battle of the Bulge,
Right.
General Patton said, to Ike at the meeting at, where was it, Alon? Or Luxembourg, wherever the meeting was, it said, I'm doing this, not because my men love me, but my men realize that we could still lose this war. I mean, historically, if we're looking back at that time when Hitler is made his big gamble in the Battle of the Bulge, we look at a historian and we say, there's no way in hell the Germany could still win the war at that point.
Right.
Even if Germany made all of their advances, the only thing they were trying to do was conquer Antwerp.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so what if they conquered Antwerp? It would have taken the U.S. 6 more months to win the war. But I mean, that's looking at it now. Looking at it then, looking at what happened in Saint Vith and Bastogne and everything else, you know, you got people living through it who don't have the same perspective that we do looking back on it, which is the same thing as the Depression.
So, all right, Larry, what's your opinion? Success, failure?
My opinion is back to shades of gray. Ultimately, World War II or the lead up to World War II is what pulled us out of the Depression. But the New Deal gave the American people hope. So yeah, somewhat of a success.
It was more a mind thing than actual huge success.
I can buy that. I mean, the issue is if we got out of the Depression in 1936, as opposed to 1939, I would say it was the biggest success in the world, because we went in, we were the last major country to come in, and we would have come out the same time as Nazi Germany if we had gotten out in 36. And with a different mindset and a different agricultural industrial complex. But we didn't.
I agree too. There's more hope. Larry, anything you want to add for this one? Because I think we've about covered every topic.
I agree. The only thing I wanted to say is, and I think it's very important, is the name of the actual case, which is the Jones-McLaughlin Steel case, where the Supreme Court switched and started to support the New Deal legislation. And that's the NLRB case.
Okay. Well,
other than that, I think that this is all it is an opinion piece, but we were able to present the facts, and we were able to at least attempt to present what a person living through the Depression actually was thinking or feeling.
We agree on a lot about the success and failures.
Correct.
Well, until next time, Larry, I will see you soon.